Hey, how you doing? Good evening. Yeah, imagine you're out camping and everything. All of a sudden you hear a twig breaking. You think it might be a person watching you, or an animal, but it's something much, much worse. Can't find out something out of horror movies watching you. You didn't even know it. Well, this story here I'm about to show y'all happened to a family right here. Exact thing happened to a family. So many people are encountering strange things and sighting with something that doesn't exist, but it happens. So let's get into the video. Hang on tight. We'll dive into the weird world. The world that's underneath this world is not so sugar sweet. Enjoy.
Nebraska when he hears it. Something massive moving through their campsite. This isn't a raccoon. This isn't even a bear. Whatever's out there is walking on two legs. 3 different states, 4 separate accounts, all describing the exact same thing. The government calls these reports misidentified wildlife. But when you see the footage captured by different witnesses, you'll realize we're dealing with something else entirely. Something that's been watching us all along. On the evening of April 14th, 2019, John and 2 friends were at an overnight camping trip in a remote corner of Nebraska. They'd driven out to this spot specifically because it was known for having some pretty good fishing, and they were planning on spending a few days just relaxing by the water, catching fish, and enjoying being away from civilization. The 3 friends had set up their individual tents in a small clearing about 50 yards away from the lake and had spent most of that first day fishing and hanging around their campfire. So by the time night fell, they were all pretty tired from the long drive and their day of activities, so they decided to turn in relatively early. Each of them crawled into their own tent, zipped up, and settled in for a peaceful night's sleep. But around 1 in the morning, John was suddenly jolted awake by this strange noise. It sounded like something was moving around their campsite. And at first, he was kind of groggy and disoriented, but as he lay there listening, he could tell that whatever was out there was big, and I mean really big. The way it was moving through their camp and knocking things around, stepping on stuff, this wasn't just a raccoon or a possum. It had to be something of substantial size. He's laying there in his sleeping bag, and he's just thinking that this has got to be a bear. I mean, northern Nebraska has bears, and they're out in the middle of nowhere. They're near water, and they've been fishing all day, right? Those are perfect circumstances to draw on a bear. But even as he's convincing himself of this, he's starting to feel really uneasy because the sounds that he's hearing, these grunting, growling noises, don't quite match any bear he's ever heard, or any other animal for that matter. Pretty soon, the noises are loud enough that they wake up the other 2 friends in their tents too, and so now all 3 of them are lying in their separate shelters, wide awake, listening to this large animal shuffling around their campsite. And of course, they're all thinking the same thing, right? It's got to be a bear, but there's just things that aren't adding up. This goes on for like 20 or 30 minutes, and then suddenly it just stops entirely, and they can't hear any more sounds. And so John quietly gets up, slowly unzips his tent, and he pokes his head around to get a look. But it's so dark that he can't see anything. But he can't hear where this large animal has gone either. But it looks like the coast is clear. So he climbs out of his tent and quickly goes over to where his friends are sleeping, and he just kind of gently taps the side of the tent to get their attention. And he whispers to them that he thinks whatever it was has moved on, but that they should all get up and stay awake for a while, just in case. He just doesn't feel great about it. His friends all agree, so all 3 of them climb out of their tents and gather around the campfire, which by now is pretty much just glowing embers. So the first thing they decide to do is to add more wood to the fire to get it started again, and they figure having a big fire going will help keep whatever it is out there at a distance. And once that's done, they then sat around the fire and discussed what they had heard. And even as they reassured each other, they were still pretty spooked. And after sitting out there for a while, they start getting drowsy and getting ready to head back to sleep. And suddenly, from off to the left, there's this incredible noise, and I'm talking extremely loud, like a massive tree falling over. All 3 of them spin around toward the sound, but they can't see a thing beyond the light of the fire. And all 3 of them hear movement in the brush, maybe 30 or 40 feet away from them. And suddenly, they hear this deep, angry growl coming from the darkness. Whatever it came from was intentionally keeping away from the light of the fire, like it didn't want to be seen. all three of them realized that the animal that this growl came out of did not sound at all like a bear. It was so much deeper and throatier. And so, completely petrified by this, one of the friends runs back into his tent, grabs his handgun. I mean, he wasn't messing around. It was a welcome sight by all. They realized pretty quickly that they would need a lot more than a measly 9mm to survive, because from not far away comes a long howling noise. But this one is much more powerful than any normal howl. Thinking quickly, they start immediately building up their fire even more and just throwing as much wood on they can to just get it big and bright and roaring. And they grab their powered lanterns and they turn them all on, placing them strategically around the perimeter of the camp just to try and create this dome of light. Not only do they want to stay safe in the light, but they want to be able to get enough light cast out that they can see whatever this thing is if it does decide to come any closer. But despite all the light that they've created, their stalker doesn't seem discouraged. They could still hear it moving around out there, just circling back and forth. And sometimes it would be on one side, and then moments later, they'd hear it on the complete opposite side without ever hearing it go around. It was clearly stalking them and testing their defenses, maybe waiting for the right opportunity. Realizing this, John and his unarmed friend grab some thick tree limbs to use as clubs. They then form a small circle around their fire with their backs to it so they could be ready in case they were to be ambushed. This entire time, they don't see any movement or anything in the dark. Toby, one of the friends who's holding a large branch, suddenly freezes as he's looking off to his right. Now, John immediately notices and asks if he's okay, but Toby doesn't answer right away. And John realizes that whatever Toby is looking at is now just beyond the reach of the fire. And a moment later, Toby finally seems to snap out of it, and he turns to his friends and just tells them there's something right there. But he's struggling because his voice is shaky and he's very scared. He tells what he thinks it might be, but none of his friends have a clue what on earth he's talking about. It was very obvious he was struggling to find the words to describe what he saw. However, none of them believed what he suggested. But Toby was incredibly insistent and was like, guys, I know what it is we're dealing with here. It's the only thing that makes sense. And as soon as he said this, he realized that the thing off to his right wasn't there anymore. And then came the grunting sounds, and the growling and the howling, still extremely close by. And in fact, John later recounted that these sounds were so strange that it kind of sounded like whatever this animal was trying to communicate with them. But by this point, all of them were feeling pretty grim about the situation because they had no idea what animal they were up against. They had never dealt with something like this before. And the only thing they could do was keep their backs to the fire and keep their perimeter defended. After this continued on for about another 10 minutes, this animal began to get closer to the firelight, enough to where John could actually start to see it. One of John's friends saw this and started going into a full-blown panic. He immediately fired a shot into the ground near where this thing was standing. And as soon as that happened, this animal jumped backwards into the dark, and John and his friends could hear it kind of scurrying away, and they could hear it crashing through the underbrush and it moving away from them. But it only lasted a few seconds because then all the sounds stopped. It was evident right then and there that this retreat wasn't an escape attempt. It was still out there and waiting for the right opportunity to come back. They weighed their options and kicked the idea around of leaving right then and there, but the idea that this unknown predator could be very close frightened them. With very limited light, it would be like walking into a death trap, and they realized their best course of action would just be to keep an eye out, make it through the night, and once they had daylight on their side and they could see, then they would leave. So of course, it's no surprise that sleep did not come, but they took all the proper precautions. They kept their fire built up as high as they possibly could, their guns at the ready, and sure enough, whatever animal this was came back and continued prowling around. And sometimes when they listened really closely, they could hear it coming so close that they could hear its breathing, like it was watching their every movement, just waiting for the right moment to strike. In what felt like a night of living hell, dawn finally came. Now, with the sun shining brightly, there were no strange noises or sounds or any evidence that this large animal was nearby. But they didn't take time to thoroughly investigate. They used it as an opportunity to get the heck out of Dodge. The animal that John and his two friends saw was most certainly not a bear. At least, it didn't look like it. What they described was a very large bipedal wolf, 7 to 7.5 feet tall, covered in white and gray fur, complete with a pair of pointed ears and reflecting yellowish eyes. It was evident that this clearly wasn't someone in a costume. The incredible muscle mass of this animal was like that of a bodybuilder. The arms hung past down the knees and had what appeared to be actual hands with fingers, each one ending in long, black, curved claws. Not paws, but actual hands with fingers. And your eyes naturally go down, right, of the torso. They could see that, like a canine, its torso tapered down at its waist, and even the back legs were hawk-jointed like a dog's. Now, when Toby tried to explain to John and their other friend what he was pretty sure this was, he believed they had encountered a Dogman. But unfortunately, what they really encountered that night will remain a mystery. Similarly, years ago, another camper had an equally terrifying experience. On the night of February 2nd, 2004, a man named Michael Lacoma was camping near Fresno alone. He found a nice little spot in the wilderness to set up, but at some point during the night when everything was quiet, he began hearing strange noises right up the slope behind his tent. The sounds were similar to something like rummaging around, but it was very close to his camp. Michael decided to investigate. He grabbed his camera and stepped outside and scanned the ridge, but instantly he saw it. And from where he could tell, it almost looked like a dog, except it was way too large, so that didn't make any sense. The video he captured may be brief, but if it's genuine footage, it is completely terrifying. Unfortunately, he shot this video with a hairdryer, but hey, it was filmed in 2004. Whatever Michael captured on camera seems to show a dark figure coming down the slope, and it's clearly bounding back and forth. Now, Fresno is a long way from Nebraska, but the point still stands that if something like this can exist in California, then there's no reason it couldn't exist in a less densely populated state like Nebraska. 12 years later, in the early morning hours of October 5th, 2016, two brothers named Charlie and Michael were waiting for the school bus to arrive in Douglas County, Nebraska. Because of the time of year, it wasn't quite morning yet. It was still pretty dark out. But for these two, the bus stop was only like 3 blocks away from their house, so this was very routine for them. Mike, the older brother, was lost in thought about a test that he had that day when he noticed that something was out of place. His younger brother was usually a lot more talkative in the mornings, basically just yapping his ear off, but today he was unusually silent. And so when Mike looked over to see what was wrong, because he could sense there was something wrong with Charlie, his brother appeared physically shaken by something, and he was just nonstop staring down the street into what little light was cresting above the horizon. So Mike looked at Charlie for a second, very confused, and he reached out and shook Charlie's shoulder, being like, "What's wrong, dude? Like, what's the issue?" Almost out of panic, Charlie shushed him, but never took his eyes off the horizon, what Michael thought he was staring at. This was obviously very strange, and now Mike was a little freaked out by this, and so he turned to look in the same direction his brother was, trying to figure out what the heck he was looking at, and when he looked, he didn't see anything. So he's like, okay, my brother's either playing a trick on me or something, but right as he's getting ready to turn to face his brother and call him out for pulling a prank, he sees movement about 100 yards down the road, right at the edge of the tree line where there are streetlights. He's still very confused as to why his brother's acting paranoid about a deer over here. And so he starts to focus on the spot, and he's squinting to try and make out what kind of deer it is. And he's convinced it's probably a big, large buck or something. But as Mike continued to watch, he started to see more and more movement, and he realized that what they were watching was not a deer. Whatever animal this was actually on 2 legs and was very large. And within about 2 seconds, this animal sprints across the road and then quickly vanishes between 2 houses on the opposite side. Just like that, it's gone. And both brothers were just completely terrified by what they saw. They didn't really say anything to each other. I mean, what was there to say? They just kept scanning the darkness, hoping that whatever it was did not come toward them, even though the bus would only be there in a few moments. As soon as the bus showed up and the door swung open, they both practically flew in and took their seats faster than any of their friends had ever seen. They were clearly spooked, but they didn't really want to talk about it. And the entire time, both brothers were just staring out the window intently. They were convinced that this thing was going to come and attack the bus, or at least follow them to the school. The brother who would later retell this account was thoroughly convinced that based on what they both saw, it had to have been a Dogman. The account was eventually submitted to the North American Dogman Project, where hundreds of other eyewitnesses have submitted their own accounts, recordings, and photos. Fast forward 4 years later. In 2020, at the very southern tip of Texas, down by the Mexico border in a place called San Benito, a man named Ruben and his friend were out fishing for alligator gar. And you know how it is when you're out there fishing. I mean, sure, you want to catch some fish, but you're also there for the experience, right? The chance to catch up with a friend or just to get some peace and quiet in nature. And so Ruben and his friend are chatting away. Their lines were already cast into the water, and they both noticed something on the opposite shoreline. Whatever it was seemed so strange that Ruben was like, you know what? I better document this. So he pulled out his phone and starts recording. And strangely, he captures something. Now, it looks like a large dog, but then we can see this thing stand up on two legs, and you can hear how amazed both Ruben and his friend are when this happens. Not sure what to do with the footage, Ruben eventually sent this to the website True Horror Stories of Texas, and it's some of the shakiest video you'll ever see, thanks to the rough water and heavy wind. The camera doesn't even pan over to the figure until about 45 seconds in, and once it does, it's tough to keep it in frame. What's interesting is you can hear how the witnesses think it's just a dog at first, and you can hear their amazement when it stands up. So whatever it shows, it's either a human being or something else. Whether or not we're seeing a cryptid here or it's just something more explainable is up to you to decide. But for now, the mystery remains. Around March of 2020, a 15-year-old girl named Sherry was getting everything prepared for what would be her perfect spring break adventure. At the time, she lived with her family in Omaha, Nebraska. Despite dealing with some very severe insomnia and anxiety, she spent a lot of her time outdoors and would often go hunting and hiking. A few weeks before this, her two best friends, Holly, who was 16, and Todd, who was 15, suggested that they go on a week-long backpacking trip in the Nebraska National Forest. She wanted to make sure she had everything she needed because this was going to be a big deal. The three of them had actually been hiking together for years and knew each other very well. And there was just that innate trust there, so they felt very comfortable surviving out in the wilderness alone for a whole week at a time. On the morning they were supposed to leave, Holly picked up Sherry and Todd in her car because she had just gotten her license, and they began to drive and head out to the Nebraska National Forest. The entire way there, they went over all the things they were going to do, the trails they were going to go up and down and explore, and just how much fun this was going to be. They were still very young, so it was very exciting. But because they lived several hours away, they didn't arrive at the trailhead until later in the afternoon. But this wasn't an issue. Their plan was to initially hike about 5 or so miles, then set up camp before it got too dark. They all three pulled out their packs and gear from the back and made sure they had everything they needed before heading off into the forest. They could not have chosen a better day to do this either. The weather was perfect. You know, that nice 75 degrees with a slight breeze, and it was just very peaceful. You know, how hikes are supposed to be. After a few hours, they had already made it 5 miles down the trail. Now was the time that they decided to find a little clearing off the trail where they could set up camp. They didn't pack super heavy though. They only brought a 2-person tent and a hammock. The original plan was that Sherry and her friend would share the tent, since they were both girls, and Todd would sleep in the hammock. While they were setting everything up, Sherry began to get really anxious over her insomnia. She knew that if she was in the tent with her friend, well, she'd probably keep her awake all night just from her constant tossing and turning. And since Sherry was a good friend, she didn't really want to keep her up on the very first night of their trip. So she's like, look, what if you and Todd sleep in the tent and I take the hammock? And you know, Todd was like, are you sure? Is that really something you want to do? The hammock isn't going to be very comfortable, but she was insistent, and she was like, the hammock will be a great chance for me to get some fresh air, and you know, I could rock back and forth, it's fine. Because they were running out of daylight, after they got everything set up, they got a roaring fire and dinner was cooked. And from there, they just kind of sat around talking and really enjoying the first night of their camping trip together. In fact, they were having such a good time that before they knew it, it was already 2 o'clock in the morning. They were so amped up from the day that they weren't really that exhausted, but they realized that at this point, they should probably try and get some sleep because of, well, they had a long day of hiking planned. It didn't take long for Holly and Todd to pass out in the tent, and of course, there is Sherry tucked away in the hammock between the two trees, and her brain is just going crazy, right? She's wired. She's thinking, oh crap, I gotta be up in the morning. We have a long day tomorrow. What's going on? Come on, brain, just shut down. After laying there thinking that for a while, she's like, well, okay, what if I just lay here and I just look up at the stars and maybe enjoy the swaying back and forth? Maybe that'll relax me. So she did that for about 10 or so minutes, but that wasn't working. So she's like, you know what? If I'm going to be awake, I might as well be productive. Very carefully and quietly, she gets out of the hammock, goes over to the fire. She's like, well, maybe I should build it up a little more and kind of just, keep it going. She throws a couple of logs on just to kind of keep it low and slow. And she kind of just stood there for a moment, really enjoying the warmth. She's trying to do everything she can to help tire her brain out and just put her body into sleep mode. She decides that she needs to go back over to the hammock to lay down once and for all, and she is going to go to sleep no matter what. So as she's climbing back in, she notices something. The night around her has gone completely silent, and she can feel her anxiety welling up again, like her body's reacting to something wrong. And so she starts to get more and more paranoid because out of all the times she's been in the forest before, you guys know there's always some kind of ambient noise. So to not have anything is just really strange and unsettling. As these thoughts are running through her mind, she hears this strange sound like something dragging against the side of the tent. It's not quick and rushed, it's very slow and deliberate, like something running along the fabric. Now, as she's listening very closely, she realizes that it's not soft, that whatever's raking across the tent is hard. And so she calls out to her friends, asking if they're awake. She's convinced they're playing a prank on her, or there's something seriously wrong. And when there was no response from the tent, she realized that her gut instincts were right. It took nearly all of her to keep from going into a full-blown panic. The dragging sounds had stopped, and she thought that maybe she had just imagined it. But no sooner had she thought that when something hard jabbed the bottom of her hammock. And immediately, her whole body tenses, her hand darts out toward her headlamp, which is hanging on the side of the hammock. And she grabs it, clicks it on, and when she does that, when that beam of light shoots out into the dark, she sees this large, hairy person standing over her, freakishly tall, like 8 or so feet, and is clearly standing on 2 legs, staring down at her. In the light of her headlamp, she could see that this thing's eyes are red, and that the features of the face are both wolf and human. And it's got pointed ears, like they've been damaged or twisted, and these massive gnarled teeth and claws. This thing looked like a killing machine. Naturally, she just starts screaming as loud as she can. She is completely terrified, and when she does this, this animal also makes a noise that kind of somewhere between a scream and a howl. And it's so loud and visceral that Sherry was convinced that she would pass out from the fear alone. Now, off to her left, she hears Todd and them start screaming, "What the heck is that?" And so she looks over and sees that both of them are now out of the tent, still half asleep, but are clearly scared from the spectacle that's happening right outside. In response to this animal jumps straight up into the tree, grabs right up above Sherry's hammock, and with crazy agility starts climbing limb after limb, pulling itself further up the trunk into the canopy. And in seconds, she's able to see more details about its appearance. And she saw that it had gray silverish fur, and then it had this kind of black mane that ran along this weird hump between its shoulders and its back. They're all 3 screaming, and so Sherry jumps up, she doesn't have her shoes on, and all 3 of them run as fast as they can back toward the trail. Now keep in mind that they're like 4 to 5 miles away from their vehicle, so this isn't just a quick, brisk walk back to the car. But they're so overcome with fear and adrenaline and the will to survive that they don't care. They can hear noises in the branches above them, and although they're not sure if that thing was following them, they're convinced it's hunting them. Through a feat of adrenaline and fear, they managed to make it all the way back to their vehicle, and it's unclear if they had a light with them. I assume they did, but they obviously left and drove all the way back to Omaha right then and there. Even though they were beyond exhausted from this ordeal, they were so amped up on adrenaline that they had to contact the authorities about what they saw and experienced. And then they realized, well, we can't really tell them what we saw. We just need to say that we had an emergency. I mean, we have to get our equipment back. Neither of them really wanted to go back and do it. So the next day, they got a hold of a park ranger, and they explained to them where they were at, the exact coordinates and what they were doing, and They just explained that they had an emergency in the middle of the night and had to abandon everything. If this ranger could go and retrieve their belongings, well, that'd be great. The ranger on the other end was basically like, yeah, sure, no problem. He took down the location, told them that they would go check it out. And as it turns out, they actually got a call back from this ranger later that day, and he was very upset. And after going to the exact coordinates given, there was nothing there. In fact, there was no sign that anyone had ever camped there. He went off on them, saying that these kids were lying and trying to make it a story for attention. It's something that Sherry hopes she never sees again. The following encounter was filmed by a woman who's also a researcher and live streamer. Months ago, she decided to explore a new undisclosed location, a dense patch of woods known for its strange sounds. Initially, her plan was just to stay the night, but she ended up capturing some very disturbing footage during her stream. On the evening of September 25th, she had driven her SUV up this old logging trail to explore somewhere new. She quickly set up a small camp, cooked some food just to kind of get some scent in the air, and even played some animal calls from her speaker, hoping that she would get some activity, or at least a response of some kind. And for the first hour or so, she didn't get anything. And it seemed like this was just going to be a dead-end investigation. But not too long later, the woods started to come alive. And this is when she decided to start the live stream and explain to her viewers what was going on. She started walking down a narrow path that led deeper into the woods. The only light she really had was her flashlight. And then she spots something. This set of eyes. What's weird is that they're relatively low to the ground, but they reflect the light with this bright yellow-orange, and oddly, the placement doesn't match up. It looks like it's sticking out of the ground, like whatever this is buried up to its chest. This went on for a little bit, and then it kind of just blinked out. Wanting to continue the investigation, she kept walking, but her senses were on very high alert at this point. She was convinced that there was a figure off in the forest just out of reach of the light. During this time, she continued hearing strange noises like growling and like something big was circling her. She continued about 50 yards down the trail where her flashlight illuminated a large thicket of tangled roots and branches at the base of a large tree. That's when she came across this massive figure that looked canine. Through the massive branches, she could make out a very distinct shape and powerful shoulders. It had a canine muzzle and what appeared to be pointed ears. The most terrifying thing, though, was not just the eyes, but how, after it was spotted, it slowly crouched down without breaking eye contact. She watched for maybe only 15 or so seconds, but she could see as it swayed slightly back and forth, and then, as soon as it disappeared from view, she heard a low growl from her left. And that can only mean one thing: it wasn't alone. After realizing that this thing had lured her back here to distract her, she was about to be flanked on both sides. Now, could this footage be faked? Absolutely. I don't think that this is hoaxed with AI for several reasons. First is that AI is terrible at generating low quality live stream looking footage because it's trained on high quality footage, and it just can't do it well at all. Secondly, is the entire sequence of her coming up to the base of the tree and staying steady on this large figure before it ever crouches down is way longer than what AI can typically do. Something about this tells me that this isn't exactly a hoax. Unfortunately, all I can do is just present you with the information, but you have to come to your own conclusions. If real, whatever being she encountered this night remains a mystery. And because you guys have made it to the end of the video, I want you to all comment down below, doggone it, so that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy storytelling like this, where we deep dive into strange cases of the mysterious and supernatural, what are you waiting for? Smack that like and subscribe button right now for more content just like this. And as always, never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode. What happens when a police officer reports being hunted by something that isn't human and is left traumatized? Another officer is hit by a mysterious energy. Federal agents come to silence his case. These two encounters share a disturbing connection, a pattern of official denial. These are the official accounts they tried to erase, and it begins at around 10 on the night of July 11th, 2008. 22-year-old Brandon Hines and his 19-year-old girlfriend, Jamie Marker, were sitting on a wooden jetty that extended out into Ludden Lake near Mineral Point, Wisconsin. They had decided to go night fishing and had already had their lines cast out in the water. Brandon and Jamie had been dating for a while, and fishing at this lake had become one of their favorite pastimes. They would often come out here at night when the lake was quiet and they could have the jetty all to themselves. Suddenly,